So we are here, podcast season 2, and sitting with the Treaty Godmother, as she's known. And I have so much respect for you, Regena Crowchild. And I'm just so happy to be sitting here having this discussion because there's so much to cover. You know, you are just a library of knowledge when it comes to our treaties and understanding, and also moving forward and looking at the implementation and things that are slowly being eroded. So let's start off with your background. Obviously, a lot of people know who you are, but people that would be listening, you know, your title and what you've done. I know it personally, but.
Well, thank you, Nicole. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm glad to be able to share some of my knowledge and my understanding of what's happening with us with respect to our treaties with the Imperial Crown. So I'm originally from the Blood tribe. I married into the Tsuut'ina in 1966, and then I've lived here since. My husband died in 1976, and then I just stayed here because my family is here. So I was raised at the Blood tribe, and I was taught by the elders there. I listened to them, and then I came here, and then I worked for the administration. Then I was on council for many years, different times, since I started out in the 1970s, I think 75 or around there. And then I stayed, and then in 1990, I was elected president of the Indian Association of Alberta for 2 terms, and then I came back home and on council again and worked for the nation in various capacities. So I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of elders from across the province, also across the country. So I listen and I hear what they're saying, and I watch what the government of Canada is doing for our treaties. So I've gained my long knowledge through all of that.
Yes, and you're very well known, not just for your words, but the action around, you know, understanding treaty, helping others that are in leadership, that are chiefs, grand chiefs, national chief, to understand our treaties. And that there's, as you mentioned before, you know, the numbered treaties, the modern treaties. So with your in the very upstart of, you know, working in this area and really helping to empower, you know, your chief and council, but not only that, the Indian Association of Alberta, you know, what's the change that you've seen from that time till now with what's going on with our treaties?
Well, if you go back to when the treaties were entered into, and treaties 1 to 11 with the Imperial Crown were entered into since 1871 up until 1921 up in the Northwest Territories. So when I was a little girl, you know, my dad used to take me to his meetings, and I'd listen to the elders to learn what the treaty was about, because my father made sure that I knew who I am, what my history is, what the treaty is about, because he told me I was never going to be satisfied just being a housewife and mother, and that I was very vocal, and I would express my thoughts or anything, you know, I give my opinion, so I better know who I am, because our treaties were in danger here in Canada. So since then, I've watched, we lived on the reserves, and before that, I know our people had to get permits to leave the reserve. So let's just go back to the treaty making. At treaty making, we as sovereign peoples entered into treaty with the Imperial Crown. Our peoples didn't understand the English language. They didn't speak it, they didn't write it, but they had some interpreters who also had problems because in our languages are different. They're action words, and they're not. It's really hard to find English words to explain what we're saying in Blackfoot. That's my language, is the Blackfoot language. But anyway, the intent was to make treaties with the Imperial Crown, and the Crown said at the time, you cannot settle on these lands without going through me, make a treaty, and pay fair compensation for the use of the lands that belongs to the Indians. They thought we were from India, I guess, when Christopher Columbus when he came ashore, and in a discovery period. So, but anyways, our treaties were about land sharing. Our peoples did not seek surrender or give up their nationhood, their sovereignty, their right to government, to laws, to their justice system, to their customs and their traditions, their spirituality, their language. So we're nations, we're peoples. The Creator put us here. And so when we entered into treaty, our peoples only agreed to share the territory with the newcomers to the depth of the plow, which people say the depth of the plow because it's about 12 inches, maybe, and for settlement only. So, and our peoples retained certain portions of their territory for their exclusive use to continue their way of life. So we never sold our lands. However, if you look at the written text of the Indian Act, it says that we ceded and surrendered our territories. And that's not true. The Crown promised that there will always be our peoples, the Indians, and our lands for as long as the sun shines, the grass grows, and the rivers flow. So we were to live side by side without interference. We've never interfered in the Canadian system, but they've interfered in our lives. And simply because they assumed title to our territories. They assumed jurisdiction over us. And so they enacted, and the only way that they could do that was if there were no people. But hey, we were here already. Our peoples were here. So in order to fulfill or legitimize their title to our territories, they had to get rid of us. So the Crown gave the Canada the responsibility to look after our treaties, to fulfill those promises of the treaties, because in exchange for the use of our lands, they were to certain benefits to our peoples. That's like treaty right to education, health, hunting, fishing, trapping, everything, that we have as treaty rights. And our peoples have different interpretations of what those benefits are, what we refer to as treaty rights. So they had to get rid of us. So in 1876, a year before Treaty 7 was entered into in 1877, they enacted the Federal Indian Act. In there, under the Indian Act, they stripped our peoples of all their right of self-determination, all their authority, everything, and they gave it to the Minister of Indian Affairs. Then when we went to the territories, the lands that we retained for our use, they did the first survey. They surveyed the land, and they did it and they said in the treaty, it's written text says, a family of 5 for 1 square mile. Well, our peoples never knew anything about a square mile or anything like that. It's just by land locations that they picked their areas to live. So anyway, they had to get rid of us. So in the Indian Act, first of all, the buffalo left because we used the buffalo for food, for shelter, for clothing, for everything. We didn't waste it. It was for our survival. Then the buffalo was being extinct, and a lot of our peoples were still traveling different places following the buffalo. And so anyway, they put us on these on our territory, our lands now that they call Indian reserves. And our peoples were not allowed to leave. Then they created the residential schools. The children had to go to residential school at the age of 6 or 7. When they went to the residential school, they couldn't speak their language. They couldn't learn their customs, their traditions, their way of life at all. Everything in the school was to try and colonize them, so they don't know who they are, where they come from, what the treaty was about, just to get rid of us, kill us off. Then also the adults, when women married a non-Indian, they took them off the list. You see, our peoples had complete jurisdiction over their citizenship. And at treaty, one of the things they gave us, when they came, they gave us $5. And the interpretation from our peoples was that was just a greeting gift, because that's a part of our custom. If you're going to go meet with somebody, you bring them a gift. And that's what it was, that we would get it forever and ever. So it was $5, and at the time, it was a lot of money. So when the Indian agent came to do the treaty payments, they would take the names of our peoples. They would write them down. And we had treaty cards, and they would write them down. And sometimes they couldn't write them in the language because they were all in our own language. The names are in our language. They wrote them down, and then they gave them English names. Some of them got English names. So they wrote all of that down. And then when there was a birth, when there are births in our communities, the chief would sign a note, a letter, or sign the name of that child to be added on to the treaty list. That was our treaty cards. And there were no termination dates on those cards. And in those treaty cards, there were some of our rights. And so one of the things was to travel back and forth from the States and that, because our peoples traveled all over Turtle Island, moving around. And then it talked about some of our rights under treaty. So, and every time there's a birth, there's a death, or there was a marriage, fall in their systems, whether it was patrilineal or matrilineal, they added the women or the men, however they were dealt with, to enter into the citizenship list. So our peoples had complete control over that. But then, in 1951, Canada did away with the treaty card, and they created the status card. Then they put conditions on who can be an Indian. So under Section 6, Section 6.1, if a child is born to 2 treaty Indians, they got rid of the treaty card, so they got status cards. So they would gain status. 6.2, they would, if your mother or father is an Indian on the list, then the other one is non-Indian, then you had 50% blood quantum, and then it just went down. Eventually, you lose identity as an Indian. They were trying to get rid of us. So you got to remember, all these things that happened were to get rid of us because they wanted to legitimize their title to our territories. Then in the cold winters, our peoples were freezing because it was so cold. Well, we used to have winter cold weather, about -40, -50 at that time. We used to have 4 seasons at one time. Now it's not anymore. But anyway. So they gave them blankets that were infested with smallpox germs, killed many of our people. And then also when a child was born, later on when a child was born, they took that baby and put him up for adoption into a non-Indian home, so the child never knew her language or the customs and traditions of where they came from, just to get rid of the Indian in that child. And they used to say the Indian Act, or the residential schools were to take the Indian out of the child. And they succeeded. There was no proper medical care, no, and my parents went to residential school. I went to residential school, and in our school, we couldn't speak our language, and the teachers or the nuns most of them were French Canadians. They could barely speak the English language as well. So it was difficult, but we weren't allowed to speak our language until later on. And then Indian Affairs used to take care of our benefits on treaty. And then in the 60s, 67, 68, Indian Affairs said, well, we're going to start delegating authority to the Indian tribes, the chief and council, to carry out their own administration. And that was when I came to work at Tsuut'ina in 1967, I think, 66, 67. And then, so I was band secretary. And the Indian agent was there. He controlled all the meetings, everything that chief and council did. But I was band secretary. And then in 68, they started transferring their administrations, and their administration for our peoples. But they weren't giving us enough monies to operate. So many a times our nations had to subsidize the administrations to take care of our own peoples. And then in 1969, Pierre Trudeau came up with the white paper. So the intent was just to get rid of all of us, turn us into municipalities, and we don't have reserves anymore, we don't have treaty anymore, and that we're just like the dominant society. So that happened, and our peoples argued that. They didn't agree with that. And in fact, I went with Harold Cardinal and some of our elders to Ottawa to present the red paper where we objected to getting rid of our treaty and to make us into municipalities. And then, so Pierre Trudeau kind of said, okay, well, tell me what you want. But then he said, so they kind of stopped the red paper, but they continued. They continued through the policies. Regena Crowchild was the Indian Affairs Minister at the time, and he was the author of the white paper. And he was our Minister of Indian Affairs. Oh, back then in 1960, John Diefenbaker was the Prime Minister. And he was called a friend of the Indians. Well, he was very friendly to the Indians, but of course with the same agenda to get rid of us. So he came to the Indians and he said, before that we couldn't vote in the Canadian system because we're nations and we don't vote in another nation or another state's government election processes. And he said, you've been going to the Indian Affairs, and the Indian Affairs can't take care of your treaty rights. So we're going to give you the right to vote in the Canadian system. And then you'll have a member of Parliament in Canada so they can speak for you on your behalf to deal with the treaty. So they gave us the vote. Many of our people accepted it, many didn't, and some didn't. I remember my dad saying, no, we can't do that. The only place, because they had previous to that, they had done away with our traditional forms of elections, for our headmen and our clan leaders and our minor chiefs, and they said the only place where we should be voting is for our head chief, because they introduced the election system, and our minor chiefs in Blackfoot. That's in Blackfoot, who we're supposed to be voting for. Because every time you vote out there, you're giving that government the right to legislate over you. And Canada does not have the authority to legislate over you because we're nations. They're a state. They get delegated authority from Great Britain, whereas we got it from our creator. So Canada's got no business trying to legislate, although their legislations interfered in our lives all the time, and they still do. But anyway, that happened. So many of our peoples vote. And some of our people joined the Liberal Party, the Conservative Party, the NDP, whoever. They joined them as individuals, but not as a nation. And we don't vote here on the reserve. we've disallowed voting. If our people want to vote, they can go to the adjacent areas to vote, but not on the nation. And in fact, when I was in council one time during the provincial election, the electoral officer, or whatever, he called me and he said, "You're depriving your people from voting." I said, "Why is that?" He said, "It's their constitutional right." I said, "That's your constitution, it's not ours." And he said, "Well, we know we can take action." I told him, whatever you want to take action, go ahead, do it. We're not going to argue, but they never charged us. They never did, because they knew. They know.
Yeah.
Because in 1930, 1905, they established the province of Alberta. 1930, Canada, without our consent, transferred all our natural resources to the province of Alberta, just like in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. They did that without our consent. But in that natural resource transfer agreement, there's a provision there where our people could continue to hunt, fish, trap, and gather their medicines. And in the traditional territories, they can go out. However, the province made legislation, and so since then, to make a long story short, our peoples get charged when they go into our traditional territories to hunt and trap and fish and gather their medicines. And then the province started selling the territories to private individuals, making them private lands. So our traditional territory gets smaller and smaller. And so that's what they all did. Anyway, but now, since Pierre Trudeau was in, the Conservatives got in, and then the Liberal parties got in again. So now Justin Trudeau, the son of Pierre Trudeau, is really moving fast to implement the white paper. So they said they're going to get rid of the Indian Act. And if you look at the Indian Act, the administration of our lands, the management of our lands are in the Indian Act, which is a collective right to our peoples. Our peoples don't individually own a land, any parcels of land, but our leadership can allocate certain acres of land to each family for their personal use, whether it's ranching, farming, or business or whatever. But the individuals don't own the land. We don't own the land individually, because it's our responsibility to take care of our lands for future generations, today, tomorrow's children yet born, so that the Tsuut'ina would always have a home here and not live in the allowances like the Métis did, or out in areas, settling in different areas. But there's always lands reserved for our peoples to continue our way of life. So anyway, so Justin Trudeau says, "Well, I'm going to get rid of the Indian Act. It's bad, and our treaty payments are in there, the $5, that greeting gift that some people think is a purchasing gift that we sold our lands," which is totally a lie, because that's not the way our peoples understood it. So he's going to get rid of the Indian Act, and our tax exemption is in there. Nobody can tax us for our property here. We purchase something, we're bringing it home. It's tax-free. We don't pay taxes, although the government has always made sure that we pay GST. So we're tax collectors for Canada in that respect. I know one year we tried to not pay the taxes, the GST, and we collected it. And then somehow, I don't know, over the years, they had to pay it back to Canada. And they didn't even give us cents to be their tax collectors. They didn't give us any admin costs, nothing. But anyway, so, and then, so we took over our education program. Well, we already had an education program. We had health systems, our ways, and then we had some form of economic development. We used to trade and that was all ours, that we did prior. And in fact, we used to play hand games, our own gambling. We had our own justice system, We had the peacemaking system. So when people did harm to another person in the tribe, the peacemaking system, the elders would get together and they'd have to meet who is the person that did harm, and meet with the family that they did harm to. And the person would make restitution to the people that he harmed. So they faced them face to face. So there was some kind of reconciliation between those families. And if they didn't do it, then they were ousted. And if someone committed murder or some heinous crime, they can be taken off the res or not allowed to live on the res. And that goes. We still had some people like that not too long ago. And in fact, we got one, I think, now that is still under that rule. That's our own law. And but we had our own justice system. We had our own court system. We had our own laws. We had our spiritual laws. We had our traditional laws. We did the law. We had our lawmaking authority. We had our own police. We had the brave dogs. You know, they looked after the safety of the community. We had everything. But they took that away. And so many of our people would go to provincial court and they get charged and then off to jail they go, or they pay a hefty fine. And many times they were not represented by people that really cared for them, the lawyers that cared for them. So many of them were in jail. But, you know, when they came out of school, residential school, because they had no mental health services, they came out not knowing who they are, their language, their ways of life, their value systems, their principles. And then Canada introduced the liquor. We never used to have liquor on the reserve. And they introduced the liquor. And so because our people, and there was a lot of sexual abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse in the residential schools, and they never dealt with healing. So when they left the residential schools, many of our peoples turned to alcohol. Many of them had children. The province took them because they didn't know their responsibilities, or because of alcohol or other issues. And then now it's drugs. So it just goes on and on and on.
Yes.
Or our peoples didn't understand who they are, what their responsibilities are, what their principles are, what their values are, all our customs and our traditions, so they were lost. And today, we have such a high percentage in the jails of our peoples. Many of our children are in foster care, and now we're working to try and get them back. So there's a lot of mental health healing that we have to do, that we have to take care of. Canada did a tremendous job on us, horrible job, to get rid of us, all to prove that they have title to our territories. And that's genocide, plain genocide. So now, back to where I said they're going to get rid of the Indian Act, but they're developing other systems, like the Land Management Code, which would make our lands fee simple. We could use our lands to use as collateral for loans. We could sell them, because Canada is now going to give us that right. And then they have the Fiscal Management Act. Then comes along the Tax Commission. So it's going to come up to a point where we have to tax our peoples for the use of their own lands. And then they've got Child Welfare Act, C-92, where they delegate authority to us to look after our children. And those are our responsibilities. So they gave us that. And so they're doing all of these things, and they're setting up new fiscal arrangements for us. It's called a 10-year grant. And how they're catching many of our peoples is, we'll give you monies for 10 years based on current funding arrangements that are insufficient for the use of our peoples for health, education, everything for our peoples. No, it's not any more than that. But after the 10 years is up, and so they say you can get those monies and you can do whatever you want with them all those 10 years. It's under your authority. We're not going to tell you have to give you approval for your budgets and that. You can do it yourself. But there's no guarantee after 10 years. So if people would wake up, there'll be no more monies coming from Indian Affairs. We're going to have tax powers. Our lands are going to be fee simple that we can use as collateral, and we'll probably be paying taxes on our territories. We can look after our children, but under their authority. Even our language, the legislated language. See, every time Canada legislates for us, we're the most legislated people in the world, I think. They're delegating authority to us that we already have. Because they don't want to recognize our treaties. They're going to get rid of our treaties. And they're going to make us into municipalities. So the promises of treaty are no longer there. And our people need to understand that.
So people listening to this would say, oh my goodness, how did they get this far, with child welfare, the Land Management Act. If you look, we were just talking to Aroha in New Zealand, they're slowly saying none of this, treaties. In fact, they're going backwards and taking powers away from the Indigenous peoples there. It almost seems like there's a whole international push for that.
Well, all the countries, the Commonwealth countries that Great Britain entered into treaty with, the Imperial Crown, that's what they're doing. They're going to get rid of us. And that's their goal, and it's never changed. And it's going to continue. And Justin Trudeau's moving so fast to get there, I guess on behalf of his daddy, Pierre Trudeau.
Well, and this is the thing is that back, I think it was 2009 when I was working with Chief Teresa Spencer when she went on a hunger strike during that, the beginning or during Idle No More, when those elders and chiefs went into Parliament to talk to the Natural Resources Minister because of the omnibus bill and, that Harper was putting through.
Yes.
And so I was there during that time, working with Chief Wallace Fox as well. And I remember there was a letter that Sharon Venn had put together in between two pieces of birch bark. I guess it's in the treaty somewhere to send to the Queen if there was some kind of urgent nature of urgency. And they sent it by, courier overnight or something to the palace, to Buckingham Palace. So. Then a letter came back from her. On her letter had the imperial crown, but Elizabeth, Queen.
Yeah, Queen Elizabeth.
And in that letter it said, she cannot get involved with any domestic issues to do with treaty.
Well, we don't believe that because they're our treaty partner. Canada is not our treaty partner. In 1982, at the patriation of the Constitution Act of 1982, Section 35 speaks to the recognition and affirmation of treaty and Aboriginal rights. And so it's there. So Canada had the responsibility to recognize and respect our treaties, take our treaties into account. And then the UN declaration that many of our peoples, the Indigenous peoples around the world, worked so hard on, it was adopted by the UN Assembly, the United Nations Assembly, and except at the time when it was voted in, when it was put at the Assembly, Canada, the United States, Australia, and New Zealand voted against it. Eventually, they quietly accepted it. So when the Declaration came to Canada, they domesticated it. See, all those legislations were supposed to recognize and support all the rights of the Indigenous peoples in that declaration. What they did was they domesticated that declaration and put it under their law. So they didn't have to recognize and respect our treaties and our right of self-determination. So that's what Canada's been doing. And they're using that, and it's called CANDRIP. We call it CANDRIP because it's Canada's, right? And then to set out the framework to get rid of us. That's what it is. But if you look at Article 46 of the Declaration, and that's the only way some of those states were accepted it, it gives them continuing authority to legislate. So Canada still continues to legislate our rights, then delegates authority to us under their framework, to our peoples, so that we are not nations, so take away our nationhood. That's what happened.
Yes, and I was going to ask you, because that has been on the table nationally at, say, the AFN Assembly, where they're talking more about UNDRIP than they are about treaties. And I think that's a very dangerous path to be going down.
It is. It's the framework to municipalize us. That's what it is. And then Canada we've invited Justin Trudeau and his people, his cabinet, to come and meet with us. They have yet to come. But they go to the AFN, who has 643 chiefs. Once you're a chief, you're automatically a member there. So you've got chiefs that represent international treaties, like Treaties 1 to 11. You've got the pre-Confederation treaties. You've got the domestic treaties that they call modern treaties. And then others that may not. They put us all together so that chiefs make resolutions, and that's AFN's mandate. So out of all those chiefs, the Treaties 1 to 11 chiefs are outnumbered. There's only 234, I believe. We're outnumbered. So, and those resolutions give the mandate to AFN, National Chief and the Executive. So when they implement them, we are considered as agreeing to that. If we vote against it, we're outnumbered. If we're silent, it's considered as agreeing. So it's really difficult. It's a melting pot process. That's and the AFN is funded by Canada. So who's going to slap the hand that feeds them? Yeah. Well, we have Treaties 1 to 11. We're not funded by Canada, and we're trying our best to retain our treaty politically, so we don't have to go to court because it's expensive. Our people are living in poverty. Many of our people are living in poverty all across Canada, Treaties 1 to 11, while Canada is prospering in our territories. Because in the 1930s, they transferred our oil to the province, and the province of Alberta has been just doing great with all our natural resources.
Well, and that's exactly it, is that NRTA, from my understanding, was illegal in the first place.
It's illegal because they never got our consent.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking, now that we're here, I was speaking with another elder a couple weeks ago, and I was talking about how our identity is sort of like the last frontier of taking away, and melting down who's in First Nation, Métis, especially the Métis, that have been given, the right to speak, say, on the news, and who is who in the zoo, I call it, right? Before you would see somebody, you'd know, oh, yes, that's right. They're really a specialist on this. Nowadays, you don't even know who that person is and what their lived experience is.
Well, you see, Canada recognized the Métis. If you look in Treaty 7, there are no Métis colonies, none whatsoever. But there's Métis living in Lethbridge and in Calgary, and there's some colonies up north. But the Métis came, our peoples were here first. The French came, the English came, then came the Métis. If it wasn't a combination of those two, they would never be here. And that's the fact. And now Canada is recognizing them. They also gave them the right to self-government. And they've got no lands. So, except their colonies, the ones up north. And I understand in Manitoba they were getting some land. So once you get the right to self-government, you negotiate the right to self-government, then you're going to need land. So where is that land going to come from? No other than our lands. Because I doubt it if the province is going to give them any of their of our traditional territories that they control. So those are scary things that happen. And in 1982, Canada included words as Aboriginal and treaty rights. They recognized the Métis as Aboriginal peoples.
Yes.
But if you look at 9124, it says Indians and lands reserved for Indians. That was just our Indians. That's just us. No Métis.
No.
So you have to know what Canada's doing in their legislations. And we can't continue to be fooled. Our kids are going to get rid of our lands. We lose our lands, we lose everything. What's going to happen to our children and future generation?
Yeah.
What? We're just going to be mere Canadians?
Yeah, and that's exactly it. It was actually Peter Many Wounds that had mentioned the identity, who had mentioned Dr. Leroy Little Bear, that said, he said 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that, the last thing that they would be taking is our identity as peoples. And that's slowly happening right now.
Yes.
And so looking at, say, the young people that are listening to this, and so what can they do to help with this cause in terms of, when we've entered into treaty and keeping and trying to help the, not just the education, but also the implementation of keeping our treaties guarded, helping to move that forward in a way that's not going to slowly erode our rights, because that's what's happening.
Well, for one thing, they're going to have to learn. I encourage all young people to learn their language. The language is key to our identity. And then to learn about their customs and their traditions, how they operate toward their history, and then to watch how the government of Canada is dealing with us, taking away our treaties, and the Crown's responsibilities for us. So they need to be educated in our ways, our understanding of the treaty, our language, our identity. Just as I think that's even more important than the Western system, because you got to be able to protect what you've got. And we've got a lot of young people who are learning and who are out there figuring out what's happening to us. And those are our young warriors, and they're going to learn. But us colonized elders or leadership, we have to learn too. And if you find, traveling around, I listen to some of the chiefs and some of the counselors, some of the people speaking, and I wonder, and I think, when they have a trust responsibility for their peoples, how could they make those deals with Canada, which will do away with us eventually? Where's that trust responsibility?
That's a question that a lot of people are asking online about cows and plows and looking at the big payouts that they want to just sign because a lot of our people are living in poverty and they're saying, you know what, we need that $20,000 or $30,000. And then you have some chiefs that say, no, we're not signing, we're going to hold out. And then you have others that we know that have made the case that, yes, it's a good thing, you know?
Well, the cows and plows is part of a treaty right, but they put it under a specific claims policy. See, once you go under the specific claims policy, it's a final settlement. So the cows and plows goes in there. But once you take it, the agreement is that you're never going to get it again. And who are we to stop that treaty right to our peoples today, tomorrow, and in the future? That's our responsibility. So Canada cannot be doing that. Now, we got to stop Canada from doing that. We haven't applied for cows and plows because of the very fact that we don't want our future generation to go without that right. We're trying to protect our treaty. We're doing whatever we can. And then make sure that our peoples can benefit under the treaty as was promised by the Crown. But our peoples, because they're living in poverty, they're so vulnerable. And of course, Canada knows you just have to dangle a little bit of money in front of them and they'll take it. Well, it's rightfully theirs, but they can't stop it. And only us can stop that. So, and it's so sad. But Canada is doing everything to do away with the treaty, including the treaty rights, and which they have. They have failed miserably in fulfilling. And now they're going to get rid of that, make our lands fee simple, which is going to be municipalities if you really look at it. For example, like that Land Management Act is so scary. Our nation here in the early 90s had applied for some money when it first came out, just to explore it, check it out. Then we realized what is happening. If we go under that Land Management Act, then we were going in the process of gaining we have full responsibility for our lands, but doing away with that trust responsibility from the Crown. So we did a survey. We asked the people, do you want to go under the Land Management Act, make our lands fee simple? Do you want, and we can use it as collateral for loans, because we've always subsidized Canada for our benefits under treaty. And we treat all our people the same way, wherever they need. We've subsidized them for education, for health, everything that we need for our peoples. Or do you want to stay under the Indian Act? Or do you want to make your own law? The majority said our own law. We are nations. So that law is just about done. The land law is a political issue. And our population is increasing. Our children are getting married. They're having babies. And we've really increased. We're running out of land. And we're having problems. So our people weren't used to living in town sites and that. But now we have a town site. We have a couple of town sites. And we might be forced to do that, continually do that, because so to have housing. We have over 200 families that we subsidize rent for in the city because there's no homes out here for them to live. So it's difficult. We've got the army lease.
Yeah.
And that land has been cleaned a little bit, but it's not really safe yet. So I don't know when it's going to be safe to put homes in there, and if kids running around, in their yards or whatever. Yeah. That there's going to be an unexploded ordinance there. We don't know. Jeez. And then
Ring Road.
We got land in exchange, and that's up west. But that's going to be millions of dollars to put infrastructure in there. in there because this is raw land. And until we can get those kind of monies, we can't do anything at this point.
And that's the thing I was going to ask too, is that out west, the water has gone from, say, being up to about here to ankles. And it's a dam, the Springbank Dam. And I was thinking, that's impeding treaty right to water.
Yes, we never gave up our right to water because those were ours. We never gave them up on treaty, but Canada took them. And this elbow, just for this example, Muriel Many Wounds led a march, and we fought that. We went to court. The court determined that the waterbed is ours. We won that fight. So the water flowing on top of the waterbed is ours. That's ours. We never gave it up. But if you look at the oil industry and all the permits that the province of Alberta is given to businesses, they're polluting all our water. We're losing our water coming from the mountains. So our water is getting less and less. And then we haven't had safe drinking water. Well, I can't really talk about that. Or safe drinking water, we challenged. There was the Blood Tribe, Sucker Creek, Ermineskin, and us in 2014. We challenged Canada because of what's happening to our water. We don't have safe drinking water on the reserve. So we went to court, and we're still in the process of negotiating out a court settlement. But after that, they started giving out water monies. So people started applying for that.
Wow.
So you have to really look at what they're doing to us. I don't even know if I should be talking about our own personal stuff here on the res, but those are just examples of what they do to us.
Well, and then you guys, Tsuut'ina Nation has been always, what you guys have done, you've been the forerunners of many, from my understanding, sitting with Peter Many Wounds as well, forerunners in different areas of, say, even data sovereignty to exerting your own sovereignty over your land, your water, your everything.
Our people.
And yes, and you're not there tooting your own horn. It's just being done.
No, we're just doing our work. We've
Yes.
done so many pieces of legislation to assert jurisdiction. We're maintaining our jurisdiction as a nation should, and without the approval of the government of Canada.
And making your own laws.
We make our own laws.
Yeah.
We're doing our own thing here.
Yeah.
Because we got to retain the identity of the Tsuut'ina peoples. We got to protect our land, our water. And so we just have to keep moving. It's slow. Politically, it's very slow. But, we don't care what Canada does. This is our jurisdiction, and we can claim it. Even in gaming, the criminal code gives the regulation of gaming to the province. So when we got our casino, we had to go under there. But hopefully that's going to change soon because we have a right. That's our jurisdiction. And that's a part of our economic development.
So in close, I was going to ask you when I should say, moving treaties forward and say you're sitting with this current King Charles and having that discussion, what would you hope to get being able to have that discussion to sit across from him?
Well, we're hoping. I've met him once when he was a prince. And I told him, and amongst a couple of other people, of what Canada was doing our treaties. And he said, I believe in the treaties, And I says, well, you better tell your mother, the Queen, that Canada is destroying our treaties. And he said, yes, I will. He was very proper, very polite. But I did tell him that. So hopefully we can meet with him. But then if you look at the Governor General, who is the Crown's representative, and she's got a responsibility for these treaties, the same as giving or royal assent to Canada's legislations. But he or she, all these years, just do whatever the government of Canada says. So they're not really representing the Crown on our behalf or us with the Crown on our behalf. And I did meet with her, or some of the chiefs and I met with her about a month ago. And I gave her a letter of invitation to come to Tsuut'ina August the 22nd, when we're hosting that week. We're hosting the Treaties 1 to 11 gathering. So hopefully she will come. When I told her what our perspective of how Canada was dealing with us and our treaties. So hopefully, but mind you, she comes from an area where they negotiated self-government. We won't negotiate self-government because we already have a right to government.
Yes.
And so hopefully, then through her, a letter was supposed to have been sent to the Crown. We haven't heard any response yet.
Perfect.
And we're also inviting. We're just going to send out that mail strike. We couldn't do it right away, but we're going to invite all the leaders of the federal parties to come and meet with us. So we're just using the political process to try and get ahead and let them know. And we told Justin Trudeau and the Governor General, we do not give our consent for the termination of our treaties.
Good. So does it, just in close, I know that the First Ministers meeting, they're meeting with the other premiers today, I believe, and tomorrow. Does it make you feel better knowing that there's a First Nation man, Wab Canoe, that's sitting amongst those premiers? Because for many years, they tried to get the national chief into those meetings, but we didn't have a seat at the table. But now that we actually have a First Nation man that is a premier, do you think that's better than having?
Well, it depends. It really depends, because he gave some rights to the Métis in Manitoba, and I don't know if the Treaty Indians there gave their consent. So I really don't know. But he's very popular amongst our people. But I don't know. That's my honest opinion.
Yeah.
So, but he seems like he can be very cooperative, and that. But then, if you look at the, at the patriation of the Constitution Act 1982, and AFN was there, AFN won't even let us Treaty Indians have a voice. They won't even let us into the room. Our chiefs, we had no say. And then when they dealt with Charlottetown Accord, our chief was only able to sit as an observer. But we had the other one down, the other one down east where Elijah Harper was?
Reach Accord.
Accord. And Elijah is a hero to us. He's a hero to us with his feather, and he said no. Because the Manitoba, everyone MP had to say yes. And he was the only one that said no. So we're forever grateful to him. Because Quebec was going to be a distinct society, and Canada just totally ignoring our nations. So, but anyway, so you have to look at the political world,
yes,
and see how and you have to look at our leadership. How many of our leadership are colonized? They don't know any other way. So our young people, I'm depending on the younger people, and there's a lot of them, are really interested in who they are, what their history is, what the treaty is, and they want to assert their nationhood. And so I'm hoping, I just have great faith in them.
Thank you so much. This has been such a blessing, and we're so happy that you came on We Are Here podcast. So hi, and thank you so much, Regena.
Oh, you're welcome. There's a lot to say, but I just tried to give you a good picture of what's happening to us.
It's a master class in treaties.
Canada is not going to beat us. Not here at Tsuut'ina anyway.